Hey everybody, lighting's still weird since continuing to work on the move that's now coming up pretty imminently, but I did want to give an update on something I alluded to at the end of the previous video, and that's some new material that's going to be a bonus for anybody who has Self-Command or picks up Self-Command. Now, at a high level, if you're not yet familiar with it, Self-Command, which you can find at self-command.com, it's a productivity audiobook. First and foremost, it includes a pack-in transcript if you prefer to read the ebook formats, as well as it's bundled also with a philosophy text that's adjacent but sort of its own thing, that's Self-Calm. And Self-Command is just a method for kind of staying on focus, for staying on a task that we assign ourselves, whether we're working on game development, but also other things, right? I use the same technique for business. I use the same technique to produce new content, to make videos like this. It's when we're trying to direct our attention, and there's a lot of different things tugging at our different priorities and needs and challenges, and we find ourselves kind of jammed up on trying to do too many things at once. It's a really, really simple, straightforward system that I kind of break down in that audiobook how to implement so that you can keep yourself on focus until a task is done. And it kind of helps us build up kind of a faster flywheel of confidence that when I do have a little time and energy, however much or little that might be, I'm spending it in the direction and the way that I intend. Now, the new material I'm actually working on, it's already kind of in second, third draft. It's already going through some testing phases. It may still not be available until after I finish my move in a few weeks, because I've still got to turn the transcript out of it. I've still got to do some other kind of additional packaging related challenges and obstacles, but basically the core material is there. It's about 2 hours of content. It's called Self-Doubt, and it fundamentally focuses on when I'd work with my training clients about using self-command methods or talk to them about it. Occasionally the challenge was they would find that there's things that they want to do, but for various reasons, these questions would bubble up in us that stop us from even starting it, that stop us from even trusting ourselves to assign ourselves the task. And so it's just 10 different sections breaking down different sets of common questions people have that arise in them about why they won't try something that is not yet part of their identity, or they're new to, or they have concerns about what it's going to lead to, or how it's going to go, or how it's going to turn out. And each one of those, I sort of just set up a quick Q&A. Here's the question. Here's exactly how we've worked through untangling that for people. Because again, it's more general. Even though game development's most of the case I'm working with people on, the neat thing about game development is it's such a broad, expansive medium and field that I find myself working through these same patterns, whether or not someone's working on programming or design or team management or music creation or artwork or any other piece of that puzzle, in a way that makes it clear that these patterns are not unique in any way, shape, or form to making games. They apply as well to if you want to start and run your podcast, make some YouTube content, make a video course, start a business, do other kinds of things in your life. The techniques I'm deploying there and helping train people are really the same kind of stuff I've used in my own path that have at least helped me keep doing the things I want to do and giving myself the shot at trying to do new things to me so I can build up experience in those areas. So that's called Self-Doubt. It's going to be completely included with Self-Command, no added cost, which means if you already got Self-Command, it's going to go to, by the way, quick note about the cost, you'll actually see spelled out on the page. If you get any sort of sticker shock, I mean, it's not wild, but it is a potentially significant boost to your productivity and your efficiency. You might see some ROI on. But if you read details on the page, there is a way to get Self-Command at truly zero cost, truly no cost. It explains on there where in exchange for doing kind of 2 hours of good out in the world, pretty broadly defined, volunteering, protesting, things that are important to you that you're looking out for about helping others, but giving back, you can actually get it for free because I want to help accelerate those people's purpose and mission. So if that applies to you and the money would be a barrier, you do have a way to get Self-Command. Now, the other note is that even though Self-Doubt is going out as a bonus material, it's going to go out free to everybody who already has Self-Command. It's going to be packed into the future version. It will be increasing non-trivially the overall value of the package. It's probably going to be a slight price increase from the current level up once this is bundled in there, in addition to the 2 core materials that are already in there, which again includes all the audiobook format as well as several versions of audiobook format, as well as several versions of e-text, readable transcript styles. It's going to include all the same versions here for Self-Doubt, which is another 2 hours of content, and I think fills an important kind of keystone piece in helping you further leverage those systems. So not only will you be equipped to kind of guide your attention towards doing the thing you mean to do, but it's also going to help you untangle what are the knots that prevent us from even attempting the thing that really deep down I want to be trying, I want to be making progress on, I want to be putting my, again, finite time and energy towards navigating that uncertainty, doing things in spite of that, all that I've always break that down. I'll include here a few short excerpts. Obviously, there's a lot more content there, but I just want to keep kind of throwing a few different examples. You're kind of wondering, what does this sound like? What's it like? What's the gist of it? But so here's a few snippets of Self-Doubt. Self-Doubt by Chris DeLeon. Introduction. First, I just want to do a real quick high-level explanation of what this material exists for, why I'm creating it, where it fits in. And basically, it developed from a few points I made in my productivity audiobook, Self-Command, where Self-Command's about helping yourself stay on track for a task But there's a few points in there that I realized kept coming up when I talked to some of my training clients, the people I help with game development, about basically why they wouldn't begin a task, why they wouldn't even trust themselves to start down it. And there's a lot of different ways of thinking that these questions that pop up in our head, these doubts that occur, that are perfectly natural, that happen to all kinds of people, regardless of age and cultural background. In fact, regardless of training, even if you have the confidence of a related degree or work experience, still when we're independent, when we're trying to explore our own territory, break new ground and grow in new ways, these kind of questions come up and challenge us. What if there's more I can learn about this first? There's always more you can learn about it. There will always be more material. There's essentially infinite material to learn from, because not only is there more already in existence, probably online, probably free or affordable, than you could ever get through all of, but more of it's being produced faster than you could ever consume it. That's just the pace of technology and information these days. And so because of that, you can't keep putting off doing things until you've learned every single thing ever written or said about it. Lots of folks use it as a form of procrastination to keep reading and keep watching and figuring, once I finish this book, once I finish this video, once I finish this tutorial series, then I'll get my hands dirty. And it does take a little bit of a foundation to get started, but a lot of this foundation a lot of people think they need to give themselves in order to start getting real hands-on experience doing it. And your ability to absorb and act on the benefit of what materials are out there that are written and spoken vastly improve when you have context, to have better questions, to have seen how the things you're finding fix actual issues you've run up against, from having first tried doing things in the way that came naturally to you, or that were the best you could do from the things you had read and seen so far. Until that point, so much of the information is sliding right off of you. Section 2. Timing. Did I get into this too late because everybody else seems to have already had a head start? Now, there's a couple important things that happen here to think about. And one is that you're never too late. Looking back on it, you're always going to wish you had started earlier, which means right now is the time you're having this thought. That's when future you is going to wish you had actually done it. You don't want to look back on the fact that you thought about, should I have started already, and feel bad because you didn't, and then still not start, or another year passes and you still haven't done it. The other thing is that in a lot of cases, the people who you think have a head start on you because they've been doing it longer, maybe haven't been going in the right direction. So it doesn't matter if they've been going longer if they've been going backwards. Things are changing constantly. So it was the right direction 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Today is no longer the right direction. And what happens is people who were doing the right thing at the time, who are making progress, in hindsight are going to have to do a lot of relearning, unlearning, changing their approach, changing their tools, changing their pipelines, adapting their network in new directions. And because of that, you actually have about as good a footing as they do. Now, they might still use that experience to get their foot in the door somewhere. They're certainly going to get some confidence boost out of it. But part of what's wild about how technology is always changing, and this is true for a lot of other creative fields too, where the trends are constantly moving, is that somebody else who may seem to have a head start, their head start is an obsolete direction, and you're much closer than you think to catching up to them. It may only be reading a few books or making a few projects before you might be surprised you're about as adept as anybody else is at certain tool pipelines, at certain topics, and at the very least able to get out there and be doing it with everybody else. And most importantly, it is that you're out there doing it. You're not just reading about it. You're not just thinking about it. It really comes from once you're doing it, everybody else around you will respect you as a peer who's doing it. Regardless of if they had a head start, regardless of if they've been doing it longer, regardless of doing it in a different way than you. But it begins by being someone who's doing it. And I'll even throw out there as another example of where, for me as a game development trainer, we've often seen happen. And sometimes I'll give talks about topics or about training for techniques and tools and so on. And one of my barriers I have to contend with is that someone says, okay, well, you learned this stuff a long time ago. You've been doing this stuff for so long. How can I put myself in their shoes as a new person? My answer, of course, is that I'm helping a lot of people who are like them. I help a lot of people who are at where they're at. And so that's a little different lens. But there's often the case that if somebody's giving a talk who's been doing this for 5 or 10 years, and they see someone else on YouTube who's starting it right now, they're just learning it as they create YouTube channels, talking about and giving tutorials and, hey, I just learned this yesterday, here's how it worked for me. That recency, that freshness is actually really appealing to a lot of people about, okay, well, they're closer to my level, I can relate better to what they're doing. What if the approach or method that I found doesn't turn out to work for me? Two things here. First of all, there's a non-trivial effect that I observed back in my weightlifting days, that there'd be a bunch of different people who worked out who had totally different strategies for their breakdowns of Monday, Wednesday, Friday would be like chest and biceps and legs days. And some people would have a different regimen, bigger, faster, stronger plan of these lifts and those lifts and those lifts. And what I eventually figured out was that more than any other kind of science about this muscle group healing during that one or anything else about these kind of ways people try to overcomplicate it, was really what's going on is when you have the clarity of a plan, you don't waste as much time. You just do it more efficiently because you're not constantly doubting and second guessing, and inevitably because of that, you fit more in. You get more done. So I saw the same effect, right? And so I was a wrestler when I was back doing these meathead days, and so I lost a lot of weight, but different diet strategies people use, there's still a range for quality and not all of them are safe and so on. But what I will say is my observation was that simply having any diet in mind already tends to see some benefits because suddenly they're paying closer attention to making conscious, deliberative choices about their relationship to what they're consuming. The same thing's applicable whether it's for business strategy, whether it's about a format for giving a speech and how to give a good talk opening, for whether it's how to plan out a project, how to architect your code. Just having any plan at all, you'll tend to get some clear benefits just by virtue of the fact that you have any plan versus no plan. It starts to put you on some rails, get you to pay more attention, and gives you the confidence to drive forward, wasting less time constantly second-guessing yourself. Even if it may not be the ultimate best plan for you, the fact that you've picked and acted on one, you're already going to see some benefits from it. But secondarily, Section 4, Perfectionism. How am I ever going to learn all of it? The bad news is also the good news. You won't. You can't. Literally no one has or ever will be able to learn all of it. Almost every field that's interesting, that's full of problems that are creative or dynamic or technologically evolving, are massive, history, constantly not just changing, but also dovetailing in dozens or hundreds of directions. And so rather than see that as overwhelming because there's too much to wrap yourself around, embracing the chaos a little bit, accepting that in order to navigate the seas, you don't have to do all of the ocean at once, you just have to do the area around you. This is part of the power of teaming up. It's part of the power of specializing. It's part of the power of not feeling limited by what we can do alone. It's accepting that you can't learn all of it. That over the span of your lifetime, any given piece you're involved with, someone else could spend their whole life in that deep specialization. And that you're making conscious choices constantly about whether you'd like to go broad or deeper on certain skill sets. And those are often valid choices in either direction. There's people who thrive on a lighter level of abstraction, people who hyper-specialize and connect more with others. It depends on what you want to accomplish. There's not necessarily a wrong choice, but there is just different choices that we make in navigating what different opportunities we want to explore, prepare ourselves for, and have behind us. To think that we can't do it until we've learned it all is like thinking that you shouldn't write or speak until you've read the entire dictionary. Learn enough to start using it, and then learn the rest as it becomes relevant to what you're doing. What if I have regrets about the choices that I made? In many cases, we can learn from those choices. They can inform the things that we won't do in the future. In some cases, perhaps we were able to embody more of our mistakes in one project, so we won't make those same mistakes in our next ones. In order for that bad experience to pay off, you have to keep doing it. Sometimes people will have a bad experience or two, take that as feedback from the universe, that so they shouldn't be composing music or telling stories or making YouTube videos. But that experience where they didn't get it right is what sets them apart from someone who doesn't have that experience. It's why they are less dangerous or less of a liability to a team than somebody who has not made those mistakes before and this is important, acknowledge and recognize that those were mistakes, that those are things that they don't want to repeat, that those are not things they'll do again. This is why among Silicon Valley, out of potential founders for companies that investors are looking at, they would in many cases feel more comfortable seeing someone who has a failed startup or two than someone who has no startup experience whatsoever, because those are, to put it very bluntly, landmines that person won't step on again. Things that they know to look out for sooner and better and more clarity and can recognize the patterns in and can notice and has the eye for in a way that somebody else may not, may be naive to, may be oblivious to until they've made that mistake personally. And so I'll say the same too when you're thinking about your potential collaborators, to not judge too harshly if they've made some mistakes, if they have some flaws in their background and their story. Again, you might see that as an opportunity where that's mistakes they won't make with you. That's opportunities for them to bring different lenses on spotting those problems earlier than somebody else who hasn't made that mistake. And when you take this lens of forgiveness and of growth to people around you, you start to recognize that there's a lot more potential collaborators around you than you saw before, because you're no longer looking for someone who's perfect. You're looking for somebody else who has learned different things than you have. What if I'm not an artist, or a programmer, or a musician, or a dancer, or a writer, or a speaker, or a leader? The thing about these kind of roles is that it's not something that we're born with or is true about us, like, say, our hair color or our height. It's something that we do and then become. We're a speaker because we speak. We're a writer because we write. We're a painter because we paint. Just as much as by bowling, you're a bowler, and by running, you're a runner. You have to do it first in order to take on that identity. And if you limit yourself by instead saying, but I'm not a musician or I'm not an artist, we limit ourselves from doing the very things that would enable us to in the future say, I am an artist or I am a musician. Section 7. Money. Shouldn't I just stick to doing what's stable and easy that I already know pretty well? The thing is, the world is going to keep changing. And what seems reliable or stable today, for reasons beyond your control and maybe beyond anyone's control, are at some point going to stop being stable. Sometimes it drops all at once in a way that surprises everyone. Sometimes it's incrementally year by year in a way that boils us like a frog, catching us off guard. There have been so many times in my own career path, I took a fork in the road between something that seemed stable on the one hand and something that seemed riskier on the other. But then in hindsight, I like to think of it as inflating the life raft before the Titanic that you're on hits an iceberg. I was with a giant AAA game company, but the entire branch I worked at wound down. One franchise, one game, one floor of the building, until the entire building was empty. When I left a startup, it pivoted in a direction that I strongly disagreed with, but if I hadn't left when I did, it would have only become harder and harder to have separated myself into doing work that I feel better about. When I left teaching in university to teach independently, the cost of tuition kept rising, the compensation for instructors kept going down, the freedom and flexibility of professors in deciding their curriculum was decreased. University faced additional challenges that would have made that line of work, that path, harder than teaching independently. So it can be deceptive about what seems like stable or safe work. You don't necessarily want to put all your expectation on the sense of, okay, well, if I don't take any risks, that's going to be safe. Because suddenly you're also competing against a huge field, an ocean full of other people who are also trying to do what's safe and stable. And occasionally you might surprise yourself at how much more robust, at how much more adaptive, at how much more flexible and easy it is to recover when you're a little more agile, a little more off on your own, doing something that, again, seemed riskier in the near term, but over the longer haul is actually a stronger position for you to be in. Section 8. Reception. What if people misunderstand or misconstrue what I'm doing, and why? They will. Just count on it, somebody will. The only way to avoid that problem is to reach no more than a handful of people or to not do it at all. As soon as you reach an audience of even 100 people, which is not a big audience in internet terms, picture the 1 in 100 most confused, misinformed, wrong, angry, distracted by having a bad day person you've ever encountered. They're going to vent at anything that gets in front of them. And when you reach a 200-person audience, you're going to have 2 of those. When you have a 2,000-person audience reach, there's going to be 20 of those. When your work, creative or business or otherwise, reaches 1 million people, you'll have 10,000 of those people who are having the 1 in 100 worst possible state of mind. Now, I'm not saying to deflect all feedback. By all means, look for patterns, learn what you can, adapt where you can improve, and there will be some useful feedback to be picked out of these things. But in other cases, it's just somebody who's having a rotten time, a rotten day, and there's really no way to avoid this if you want to be out there doing things. So make up your mind that it's going to come with the territory. You'll have to learn to navigate that like any other kind of challenge or obstacle. And it's like the Stoics say, there are foolish people, and so to expect them not to do and say some foolish things would be like expecting a fig tree not to produce figs. Other people will pretty easily see their off-the-wall takes and 1-star reviews and irrational hate venting pretty much exactly for what it is, right? They recognize that a YouTube comment should be taken with a grain of salt, that someone who is irrational online probably shouldn't be listened to as an authority. And at the end of the day, if you tried to please those people, you couldn't. You can't change their minds. They wouldn't let you. They've already made up their minds and decided what they're going to see, feel, and do. So don't waste your energy trying to please them. Work with the people who want to be worked with. What if I don't know anyone else who does it, and no one else around me has a similar interest to what I want to do? The magic of doing things is it creates a lighthouse that draws in other people who also do that thing. It will help other people find you because they'll see that you are putting out your podcast or making YouTube content, or simply by virtue of doing the thing, you make yourself visible as a person in the world who builds games or writes stories or makes poems. The other thing you'll also start to recognize happens is that as you're really doing these things and putting them into practice and growing and improving at it and increasingly have a body of work to show that proves to yourself, as much as anybody else proves to yourself that you're doing it, is you're going to start to trust yourself to put yourself into new situations, new social events, networking events, conferences, meetups, places where before you would have felt like a fish out of water. Before you wouldn't have felt like you belonged, but now you see that you're a person who's doing the same things that these people are doing. You're participating in the same practices, the same field, studying the same resources, and able to have a conversation on the basis of what you're each doing, trading notes. It's going to happen from when you start doing it. That's going to help you put yourself in those situations. In addition to a fact, again, it's going to help make it easier for people to find you. I really like this point from one of my grad professors, Dr. Brian Bacurco, that a lot of people, when they're working on publishing papers, they stress out as researchers that, am I presenting the final conclusion that's trying to say, I know everything about the subject, or these are the final answers? And it never really is. What it's really doing is it's engaging in a dialogue. It's raising a flag saying, I'm thinking about these things. I'm working on related problems. Who else is? Who else is interested in this? And by giving those talks and presenting those papers and publishing that work, it invites disagreement to them, which you want. It invites collaborators to them, which you want. Which if you hadn't put yourself out there, if you hadn't put out there your tentative conclusions, the best that you're able to do so far, then no one else can see. And again, your lighthouse isn't on. You haven't done something to help people find that you share their interest. You become the beacon to let other people know that someone around them is doing it. What if I keep procrastinating or putting it off? Keeping in mind that our focus here is often on the things that we do in our side time, our personal interests, the topics we learn on our own, the new skills we're in the process of picking up. 9 out of 10 times when someone approaches me about what they perceive as procrastination, it's actually a different problem in disguise. What's almost always going on is they haven't really given themselves a near-term deadline to make it a priority. In a lot of other situations, we can get used to somebody else putting the deadline on us. School teachers, bosses in the workplace, our spouse. But when it's you on your own doing your thing, you still have to give yourself those deadlines. The way to think about this is that procrastination really is putting off something that has a deadline. Which is to say that if you haven't yet decided on a deadline, you aren't even really procrastinating because you haven't really committed to doing that task. And this isn't just a twist of semantics. This is practical implications on the way to solve it, because it means that your next step forward isn't to somehow change that you were being lazy because you weren't. It's to paint a clearer target by giving yourself the deadlines to decide what that is. Now, sometimes people counter, I don't know how long it's going to take, or I can't put a deadline on the whole thing. And that's perfectly fine. There's a couple ways to still move past that step. The first is give yourself a deadline to come up with the bigger estimated deadline. An estimation period. Within the next 2 weeks, within the next week, that's when I'm going to have decided whether I want this to be a 3-month or 5-month scale project. Ending. Now, the closing question that I want to leave you with is a question that if you're not asking yourself, I'd like you to start asking yourself, maybe even instead of, or as a general counter to these other questions and doubts that arise. And that question is, what if I never give myself the chance to start? Realistically, the time is going to pass, right? We're going to be older. We're going to reach the next year, the next 5 years, the next 10 years. And looking back, either we've given ourselves a chance to try it on, to try it out, to take a few steps in that direction, to see if it was a fit for us, to learn what about our approach we might need to tweak, or we didn't. I've seen so much more harm happen from endless second guessing than from not second guessing ourselves enough. The most universal counter we can have to these questions is to raise our own question and say, okay, but what if I don't? Right? What if I don't at least do it imperfectly? By instead choosing to not do it at all. How much worse off I'm going to feel or be, or even for the people in my life, who, like I mentioned earlier, right? If we don't find ways to give back to ourselves the things that are important to us, we have less of ourselves to give. So anyway, that's going to be available again in probably as soon as a few weeks after this video. Might be a little bit longer depending on how move logistics go, but still working on transcripts, still working on going through some additional testing, iteration, feedback. I want to thank all the people who've tested it so far. I don't want to give a full thanks list yet since this keeps growing as more of our home team members are checking out, trying it. More of my friends are checking out, trying it, offering feedback, iterating on it. Couldn't do it without them, but I'll give a full thanks in the front part of self-doubt material when it's packed in with self-command. So check it out at self-command.com, learn more about it. You can pick it up now, and you'll get this with the bonus as it becomes updated. It'll go out through an update at again, no added cost. That's self-doubt. Hope you check it out. But that's it for the day. Thanks again for following along. My lighting's going to continue to be weird until the move, and then you're going to have a whole different background or setting. We'll see how much I can kind of do the same mock-up behind me. Might be some changes in the future, but thanks for following along. Hope you check it out. Hope it helps you out, and I'm so excited to share it with you as soon as it's ready. That's all for now. Have a great day, and catch you next time.